He was worth over $10 billion a man, who could buy anything except a sense of purpose. So he traded his penthouse for a grimy apron, determined to find the truth about the company his grandfather built. He just wanted to see if the heart of his empire still had a pulse. But then he saw her, a young waitress hiding a shattered hand and an ocean of pain behind a forced smile. A simple act of concern led him down a rabbit hole of deceit and desperation. What he discovered next wasn't just a struggle for tips. It was a devastating secret that would shatter his entire world and force him to redefine the meaning of wealth itself. Arthur Harrington felt the phantom weight of his bespoke suit, even as he pulled the starchy, twice-bleached uniform of a dishwasher over his head. The fabric was rough against his skin, a foreign material in a world where he was accustomed to cashmere and silk. From his vantage point in the steamy, clamorous kitchen of the Golden Spoon Diner, in a forgettable suburb of Chicago, he could see the sprawling city skyline through a grease-filmed window. In one of those gleaming towers on the 87th floor was his real office. An office with panoramic views, a mahogany desk the size of a small car, and a team of executives who answered his every beck and call. Here his name was Art. He was a nobody, a middle-aged man, supposedly down on his luck, looking for cash-in-hand work. He had spent a week cultivating the look, 3 days of beard growth, a cheap haircut from a strip mall barber, and calluses he'd earned by deliberately doing yard work at his estate without gloves. It was all a charade, an elaborate experiment born of profound emptiness. Arthur Harrington, at 42, was the sole heir to the Harrington Hospitality Group, a global empire of 5-star hotels, exclusive resorts, and at its foundation the humble chain of 312 Golden Spoon diners. The diners were his grandfather's legacy, the first rung on a ladder that now reached the clouds. But lately Arthur felt a chilling disconnect. The reports that landed on his desk were sterile spreadsheets and polished presentations delivered by his sharp, efficient COO, Robert Sterling. Profits were up, efficiency metrics were excellent, but the stories, the people, the soul of the business felt gone. He wanted to see it for himself, unfiltered and raw. The diner was a symphony of controlled chaos, the clang of spatulas on the griddle, the rhythmic tear of order tickets from the printer, the low hum of conversation from the dining room, all punctuated by the sharp, demanding voice of the manager, Rick Donaldson. Rick was a man whose physical stature seemed to shrink under the weight of his own bitterness. He moved with a predatory energy, his eyes constantly scanning for mistakes. It was during the chaotic lunch rush on his 3rd day that Arthur first truly noticed her. Her name was Catherine Miller, according to the faded tag pinned to her uniform. She was young, maybe early 20s, with tired eyes that held a spark of defiance. She moved with a practiced efficiency that Arthur, a student of systems and flow, could appreciate. But something was wrong. She was favoring her left hand. Her right hand was tightly wrapped in a beige compression bandage from her knuckles to her mid-forearm. Every time she picked up a heavy plate of steak and eggs or a tray laden with thick ceramic mugs of coffee, a barely perceptible wince would tighten the corners of her mouth. She'd hoist the tray onto her left shoulder, using her injured right hand only as a reluctant guide, its fingers splayed awkwardly. Arthur watched his hands plunging into the greasy water of the dish pit as she delivered an order to a family of 4. The father, a large man in a construction vest, called her, back brusquely. "Hey, you forgot the extra ketchup." "Right away, sir," Catherine said, her voice a little breathless. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned, and as she passed the service window, Rick intercepted her. "Miller Table 7 is complaining their coffee is cold. Are you even listening to your orders? You're moving like you're walking through molasses." "Sorry, Rick," she mumbled, not looking at him. "I'll get a fresh pot." "You do that," he sneered. "And pick up the pace. We're not paying you to look pretty." Arthur felt a knot of anger tighten in his stomach. He had a zero-tolerance policy for managerial abuse, a policy that Robert Sterling had assured him was enforced chain-wide. Clearly the memo hadn't reached this particular corner of his empire. Later, as the rush subsided, Catherine brought a stack of dirty dishes to the pit. She tried to slide them onto the steel counter, but a fork caught the edge, and the whole stack tilted. She instinctively reached out with her right hand to steady it, and a sharp cry of pain escaped her lips. She bit down on her lower lip, her eyes squeezed shut for a moment. "Whoa, you okay?" Arthur asked, his voice gruff, playing the part of Art the dishwasher. She opened her eyes, startled, as if just noticing he was there. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just clumsy." She cradled her right hand with her left, her face pale. "That looks like more than a sprain," he observed, nodding at the bandage. "Shouldn't you be resting that?" A shadow passed over her face, a mix of fear and annoyance. "Can't afford to," she said curtly, her tone shutting down the conversation. "Bills don't pay themselves." She turned and walked away before he could say another word, leaving Arthur standing amidst the steam and the suds. He looked at his own hands, soft and unblemished beneath the cheap rubber gloves. He had flown to this city on a private jet. His driver, a man named George, who had been with his family for 20 years, was staying at a Four Seasons, one of Arthur's own hotels, waiting for his call. The cost of George's hotel room for one night was likely more than what Catherine would make in a month of grueling shifts. The disparity was a physical blow. This wasn't just a spreadsheet problem. This was a human being in pain, working in one of his establishments, being belittled by a manager he employed. And for the first time in a very long time, Arthur Harrington felt the cold, sterile air of his boardroom replaced by the hot, righteous fire of indignation. He knew then that this wasn't just an experiment anymore. He had to know her story. The next few days, Arthur, or Art, made a point of observing Catherine. He wasn't just the owner anymore. He felt a protective, almost paternal instinct kick in. He saw the subtle ways she compensated for her injury, using the edge of a counter to pop open a bottle of soda. Carrying milk pitchers against her chest, her fingers trembling with the strain. He also saw the constant grinding pressure from Rick. Rick seemed to have a special venom reserved for Catherine. He would accidentally brush past her in the narrow walkway, jostling her injured arm. He would assign her the booths furthest from the kitchen, maximizing the distance she had to carry heavy trays. He'd time her on her tasks, clicking a stopwatch with theatrical flair. The other staff, a grizzled cook named Sal, a young busboy named Kevin, and another waitress named Maria, kept their heads down. It was the toxic unspoken rule of a bad workplace: don't make waves, or you'll be the next one to drown. Arthur decided to act, but as Art, he had to be careful. During a lull in the afternoon, he saw Catherine struggling to lift a heavy tub of dirty dishes from a bus cart. Her face was slick with sweat, her knuckles white as she tried to get a grip with her good hand. "Here, let me get that," Art said, stepping in and easily hoisting the tub. "No sense in you making that hand worse." Catherine looked up, surprised again. The suspicion in her eyes was still there, but it was softened by a flicker of gratitude. "Thanks, Art." "Don't mention it," he said, dumping the contents with a practiced clatter. "My mom always said, many hands make light work. Guess that still applies even if one of them is busted." He tried for a folksy charm, something he'd learned from his grandfather. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. "I don't think my manager got that memo." "He's a piece of work," Arthur agreed, keeping his voice low. "How long you been working for him?" "Too long." She sighed, leaning against the counter for a brief moment of respite. "Almost 2 years. It wasn't always this bad. The old manager, Mr. Henderson, was great, but he retired 6 months ago, and corporate sent Rick." Corporate. The word sent a jolt through Arthur. He was corporate. Robert Sterling had personally overseen the restructuring of the Midwest diner management. He had praised Rick Donaldson's district for its ruthless efficiency and impressive margin improvements. Now Arthur was seeing what that ruthless efficiency looked like, up close. "Why do you stay?" Arthur asked gently. "A good waitress like you could get a job anywhere." Her smile vanished. The guard went back up. "It's complicated. The pay is consistent. I need consistent." Before he could ask more, Rick's voice barked from the doorway. "Miller. Art, is this a union meeting, or are you planning on working today?" "There are tables that need wiping." Catherine flinched and immediately scurried away. Rick glared at Arthur. "You're paid to wash dishes, old man, not to socialize. Get back to it." Arthur simply nodded a slow, deliberate motion and turned back to the sink. But inside, the fire was being stoked. He started making small interventions. When he saw Catherine heading out with a heavy tray, he'd emerge from the kitchen with a trash can that needed to be taken out, using his path to open the swinging door for her. When she was in the back, rolling silverware, a task that was clearly agony for her wrist, he would create a distraction, asking her a question about an order ticket, so she could rest her hand for a moment. He'd make sure the coffee pots near her station were always full, so she wouldn't have to carry the heavy industrial urn from the kitchen. They were tiny gestures, almost invisible, but Catherine noticed. The suspicion in her eyes slowly melted away, replaced by a weary sort of trust. One afternoon, during her 15-minute break, she sat on an overturned milk crate in the alley behind the diner, unwrapping her bandage to let her hand breathe. Arthur, on his own break, sat a few feet away. Her hand was a mess. The skin was a mottled tapestry of purple and yellow bruises, and her wrist was swollen to nearly twice its normal size. It was far worse than he'd imagined. "That's not a sprain, Catherine," he said softly. She sighed, not bothering to hide it this time. "No. A few broken bones in my metacarpals, and a hairline fracture in my wrist." Arthur felt his breath catch. "Broken, Catherine, you could be doing permanent damage working like this. You have to see a doctor. You have to rest." "I did see a doctor," she said, her voice flat and tired. "The one at the walk-in clinic. He gave me this splint and told me to stay off it for 6 to 8 weeks. She gestured with her head towards the dumpster. "The splint is in there. Can't balance a tray with a hard piece of plastic strapped to your arm." Rick made that very clear. "He's forcing you to work." Arthur's voice was dangerously low. "He said if I couldn't do the job, he'd find someone who could. He knows I can't afford to be fired. I don't have company insurance. You don't qualify for it until you've been full-time for a year. And he keeps my hours at 29 a week, just under the threshold." Every word was another indictment of the system Arthur had allowed to fester under his nose. He, a man who prided himself on philanthropy and ethical business practices, was the owner of a company that manipulated hours to deny its employees health care. "How did it happen?" he asked. She quickly began rewrapping the hand, her movements precise, and hurried as if hiding evidence. "It was just an accident. I was clumsy. Fell down some stairs." The answer was too quick, too rehearsed. He'd seen people lie before in high-stakes negotiations and board meetings. She was lying to him now. But why? Before he could press her, the back door creaked open, and Rick's shadow fell over them. "Breaks over, Miller. You've got a 6 top that just sat down." His eyes flicked to her half-wrapped hand, and then to Arthur, with a look of pure venom. "And you, Art. The grease trap isn't going to clean itself." As Catherine scurried back inside, Rick took a step closer to Arthur, invading his personal space. "Listen to me, old man," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "I don't know what your game is, but Catherine is my employee. Her business is my business. You stay away from her. Keep your nose in your dishwater. Understand?" Arthur looked into the manager's cold, dead eyes. He saw a bully, a man who thrived on the power he held over desperate people. And Arthur, the billionaire in disguise, did the only thing Art the dishwasher could do. He held Rick's gaze and said nothing. But his tilance was a promise that a reckoning was coming. The threat from Rick only solidified Arthur's resolve. This was no longer just about one waitress and one bad manager. It was a symptom of a sickness, and he needed to find the source. He began to operate with a new purpose, his mind shifting from that of a passive observer to an active investigator. The diner, once a simple stage for his experiment, became a puzzle box of secrets. His first clue came from the grizzled cook, Sal. Sal was a lifer, a man who had been flipping burgers at the Golden Spoon since before Arthur was born. He communicated mostly in grunts and sighs, but he saw everything. One evening, as Arthur was helping him clean the flat-top grill, he decided to probe. "Rick seems pretty wound up all the time," Arthur said, casually, scraping hardened grease into a tray. Sal let out a short, humorless laugh. "Wound up kid, that guy's a time bomb in a cheap suit. It's gotten worse the last few months. Always on the phone with the district manager, some suit named Peterson, screaming about numbers. Food cost percentages, labor optimization, synergy, $10 words for making our lives hell." District manager Peterson. Arthur filed the name away. Peterson reported to the regional director, who in turn reported to Robert Sterling. The chain of command was clear. A few days later, Arthur got his second clue. He was taking the trash out late at night when he saw Rick loading boxes into the trunk of his personal car. They weren't trash. They were new sealed boxes of high-end coffee beans, steak cuts, and premium paper napkins. The good stuff, not the cheap alternatives, Rick usually ordered to cut costs. Arthur ducked behind the dumpster, his heart pounding. Rick was moving furtively, constantly looking over his shoulder. After Rick drove off, Arthur used his phone to discreetly take pictures of the tire tracks and the area. Back inside, he made an excuse to go into the dry storage room. As he suspected, the inventory log, a flimsy clipboard with handwritten entries, showed that they were almost out of those specific items. Rick was faking shortages, stealing premium inventory, likely selling it for cash. This explained the constant pressure to cut corners elsewhere. He had to make up for the losses from his own theft. But it was Catherine who held the central piece of the puzzle. He knew her secret was more than just a broken hand and a bad boss. The lie about falling downstairs haunted him. He started paying closer attention to her personal moments. He saw her on her breaks, not scrolling through social media like the other young staff, but staring intently at her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. One time he caught a glimpse of the screen. It wasn't a text message or a news article. It was a web page with complex medical diagrams and terminology. He saw the words gene therapy and clinical trial. The real breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday. It was a slow day, and Catherine had been tasked with polishing all the silverware in the back. Arthur was mopping the kitchen floor, the rhythmic slosh of the water a cover for his observations. Catherine's phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face instantly filled with an anxiety that was painful to watch. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice dropping to a tender whisper. "How are you feeling today?" "Oh no. Did you tell Nurse Sarah? I know it hurts, Leo. I know. You have to be brave for me, okay? Yes, I'll be there right after my shift, I promise. I have a surprise for you. I love you more. Okay, bye-bye." She hung up, and for a moment she let the facade crumble. She leaned her head against the cold steel of the prep table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The name Leo and the tone of the conversation echoed in Arthur's mind. It wasn't a boyfriend or a husband. The way she spoke with that mix of gentle encouragement and fierce love was the voice of a caregiver, a mother or a sister. He felt like an intruder, but he couldn't turn away. He watched as she wiped her eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and visibly put her professional mask back on. She squared her shoulders and went back to polishing forks, her injured hand moving stiffly, but with a renewed, desperate determination. That evening Arthur made a decision. It was a breach of privacy, a line he would never normally cross, but he felt he had no choice. He had to know what he was dealing with. He waited until her shift ended. He watched her clock out exchange a few tired words with Maria and walk out into the drizzling rain. Keeping a safe distance, Arthur Harrington in his beat-up sedan he'd bought for his art persona followed her. He expected her to go to a modest apartment building or a small house. He expected to see a life defined by humble means. He did not expect her to drive across town into a neighborhood known not for its residences, but for its world-class medical facilities. She pulled into the visitor parking garage of the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, a place Arthur knew well. Harrington Hospitality Group was one of its largest corporate donors. His blood ran cold. He parked and followed her on foot, his baseball cap pulled down low. He watched as she entered the gleaming lobby, her weary posture transformed by a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a warrior, walking onto a battlefield. He stayed back using the cover of a large pillar and watched her get into an elevator marked Oncology and Hematology Wing. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The desperation, the need for consistent pay, the refusal to take a day off despite a painful injury, the late-night research into experimental treatments, her lie about how she broke her hand. It wasn't a lie to hide her own shame. It was a lie to protect something far more precious. Arthur felt a profound sense of shame wash over him. While he was sitting in his sky-high office, insulated by his wealth, one of his employees was fighting a war he couldn't even imagine. And his own company, through its negligence and the predatory actions of its managers, was actively making her fight harder. He pulled out his personal phone, the one he kept hidden from his art life. With trembling fingers, he called his personal assistant, a woman of unparalleled discretion and efficiency named Isabel. "Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse. "I have a task for you. It is of the utmost importance and the utmost secrecy. I need to know everything there is to know about a patient at the Chicago St. Jude's. A young boy named Leo Miller." The information from Isabel arrived the next morning in a password-protected encrypted file. Arthur sat in his sterile, lonely hotel room, A high-end suite booked under a false name, a far cry from his penthouse, but still a world away from the diner, and read the report. The words on the screen painted a picture of quiet, relentless tragedy. Leo Miller was 8 years old. He was Catherine's younger brother. 2 years ago, he had been diagnosed with an extremely rare and aggressive form of leukemia. A bone marrow transplant had sent the cancer into a brief remission, but it had returned with a vengeance. The doctors had given him months, perhaps a year. Their only hope was a new experimental CAR T-cell therapy, a treatment so cutting-edge that no insurance company would touch it. The cost of the initial treatment alone was over $500,000. The file contained more. Catherine's parents had been killed in a car accident 4 years prior, leaving an 18-year-old Catherine as Leo's sole legal guardian. They had no other family. She had been working 2, sometimes 3 jobs ever since to keep them afloat and to pay for Leo's mounting medical bills. The job at the Golden Spoon was her primary source of income. And then Arthur saw the detail that made his blood freeze. The report on Catherine's hand injury. It wasn't from a fall. 3 weeks ago, a medical supply company citing overdue bills had sent aggressive collection agents to repossess a specialized home care bed and an infusion pump. There had been an altercation. Catherine had tried to block the door to plead with them. One of the men had shoved her hard. She had fallen against a door frame, her hand taking the full impact as she tried to break her fall. The hand wasn't just broken, it had been crushed. She hadn't filed a police report, fearing it would jeopardize her chances of negotiating a payment plan with the company. Arthur closed the laptop, a wave of nausea rolling over him. He felt a rage so pure and cold, it was almost paralyzing. The cruelty of it all was breathtaking. The collection agents, the medical bills, a manager like Rick preying on her desperation, a corporate system that kept her just poor enough to be controllable. It was all one monstrous machine, chewing up a young woman who was doing nothing but trying to save her brother's life. That evening, he went back to the diner, but his perspective had been irrevocably altered. The clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, the mundane complaints of customers, it all felt like a thin veneer over a world of silent, desperate battles. He watched Catherine, and now he saw not just a tired waitress, but a hero. He saw the way she forced a smile for a demanding customer, knowing that every dollar in tips was a drop in an ocean of debt. He saw the tremor in her hands as she refilled a salt shaker, a simple task that was now a painful ordeal. He understood that every single moment of her day, every ounce of her energy was dedicated to the little boy lying in a hospital bed across town. During a lull, he found her in the stockroom, carefully counting sugar packets. "Catherine," he said, his voice softer than Art had ever been. She looked up, startled. "Oh, hey, Art. Rick wants a full count on the condiments. Fun stuff?" She tried for a light-hearted tone, but it fell flat. "I heard your phone call yesterday," he said, deciding to take a risk. "To Leo." Her face went pale. The box of sugar packets slipped from her grasp, scattering across the floor. "You were listening." Her voice was a pained whisper, a mix of fear and violation. "I didn't mean to," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "I'm sorry. I heard you mention his name. Leo, is he your son?" She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. He tried to project nothing but sincere, gentle concern. Finally, she seemed to decide he wasn't a threat. She sagged against a shelf, the fight going out of her. "My brother," she said, her voice cracking. "He's my little brother." And then it all came pouring out. The diagnosis, the failed treatments, the mountain of debt. She spoke of the new experimental therapy like a distant, shimmering oasis in a vast desert, a hope so fragile she was almost afraid to speak its name. She told him about the hospital, the kindness of the nurses, and Leo's bravery. Leo loved superheroes, she said, and he was fighting like one, but his body was getting tired. The down payment for the trial is $50,000, she whispered, the number hanging in the air like a death sentence. 50,000 just to get him on the list. I've saved up almost 10. At this rate, he won't make it. She finally broke down, burying her face in her good hand, as sobs racked her body. It was a sound of pure, undiluted despair. Arthur's heart shattered. This billion-dollar man who could solve her problem with a single phone call was trapped in the persona of a powerless dishwasher. He instinctively took a step forward, wanting to offer some comfort, but he knew that platitudes were an insult to the scale of her suffering. What he could do, however, was remove one of the immediate thorns in her side. His plan began to form sharp and clear in his mind. He would deal with Rick. He would expose the rot in his company. And then he would help this girl not as a wealthy benefactor, swooping in to play God, but as someone who had borne witness to her incredible strength and courage. He let her cry, standing as a silent, helpless sentinel in the dusty stockroom. When her sobs subsided, he spoke, his voice low and firm. "Catherine," he said, "you are the strongest person I have ever met. Don't you give up. Hope is never as far away as it seems." She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't know she was looking at Arthur Harrington, the billionaire owner. She just saw Art, the quiet old dishwasher, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something powerful in his eyes, a depth and an intensity that seemed out of place next to the dish pit. She couldn't explain it, but in that moment, in the dim light of the stockroom, his strange words gave her the first sliver of genuine hope she had felt in months. Arthur Harrington now had a mission. It was no longer a passive investigation. It was a crusade. The first dragon he had to slay was Rick Donaldson. Exposing him wouldn't just bring a measure of justice. It would also create the opening Arthur needed to restructure the system that allowed men like him to thrive. He decided to use Rick's own arrogance against him. Playing the role of Art, the slightly dim, past his prime dishwasher, he started asking naive questions. "Hey, Sal," he'd ask the cook loudly enough for Rick to overhear. "I noticed we ran out of the good sirloin steaks again. The customers were complaining. You'd think for what they charge." He'd make comments to the busboy Kevin. "Geez, these paper napkins are thin as tissue paper. The ones we had last month were much better." Each comment was a carefully placed breadcrumb designed to make Rick think Art was just a harmless, gossiping old fool. Rick's reaction was predictable annoyance and contempt. He started watching Arthur more closely, which was exactly what Arthur wanted. The confrontation came on a Thursday night, one of the busiest nights of the week. Arthur had spent the day setting the stage. He'd accidentally knocked over a container in the storeroom, forcing Rick to spend an hour recounting inventory. He knew Rick would be stressed and on edge. As the dinner rush hit its peak, Arthur walked out of the kitchen and approached Rick, who was manning the host stand. He held up a bottle of generic brand ketchup. "Hey, Rick," Arthur said, his voice carrying over the diner's din. "Table 4 wanted to know if we had any of that fancy organic ketchup left, the kind I saw you putting in your car the other night." The diner didn't go silent, but a small bubble of quiet formed around them. Maria, the other waitress, froze mid-step. Sal's head poked out from the kitchen window. Rick's face went from ruddy to a startling shade of purple. He grabbed Arthur by the arm, his fingers digging in like talons, and dragged him towards the kitchen. "What did you just say?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "I just asked a question," Arthur said, feigning confusion. "I saw you loading boxes. Ketchup coffee, those nice steaks." "You're a senile old fool who doesn't know what he's talking about," Rick snarled, shoving him against the swinging kitchen doors. This was the moment. Arthur let himself be shoved, but he didn't back down. "Funny, because I took some pictures of the boxes, and your license plate, and the inventory log you faked for this week. It all seems to tell a pretty clear story." Panic flashed in Rick's eyes, quickly replaced by pure rage. This dishwasher, this nobody was threatening to undo everything. He was a cornered animal. "You're fired," Rick bellowed, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "Get your things and get out. You're done." "You can't fire me for asking a question," Arthur said calmly, though his heart was hammering. He had to push Rick over the edge. "I can do whatever the hell I want," Rick shouted, jabbing a finger into Arthur's chest. "This is my diner. My rules now. Get out before I call the cops and have you thrown out for trespassing." Catherine had followed them into the kitchen, her face a mask of fear and confusion. "Rick, what's going on?" "Stay out of this, Miller," Rick screamed at her. Then he turned his fury back to Arthur. "You think you're smart, old man? You're nothing. You're a ghost. I'll make one call and make sure you never get a job in this city again." As if on cue, Rick pulled out his phone. Arthur watched him, his expression unreadable. This was the final piece of the puzzle he needed. He wanted to see who Rick called when he was spooked, who was his partner, his superior in the scheme. Rick frantically scrolled through his contacts and hit a number. He turned his back trying to shield the call, but Arthur could hear the panicked, hushed tones. "Peterson, it's me. We have a problem. A big one. No, it's one of the staff, the dishwasher. He knows. He knows about the supply shipments. I don't know how he knows, but he's threatening to go to corporate. I fired him, but he's not backing down." There was a pause. Arthur could faintly hear the tinny, angry voice on the other end. "What do you mean, handle it?" Rick whispered frantically. "What am I supposed to do? No, I can't do that." Okay, I understand." Rick hung up, his face ashen. He turned back to Arthur, his bravado gone, replaced by a cold reptilian fear. The threat from his superior was clearly far greater than the threat from a dishwasher. "Get out," Rick said, his voice low and trembling. "Get out now, and you forget everything you saw. You forget my name. You forget this place, or you'll regret it." Arthur looked at Catherine, who was standing frozen by the dish pit, her eyes wide with terror. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a look that said, "It's okay. This is part of the plan." Then he turned and walked out of the kitchen, through the dining room filled with staring patrons, and out the front door into the cool night air. He hadn't been fired. He had just lit the fuse on a bomb, and he knew exactly when and where it was going to detonate. He walked to his beat-up sedan, pulled out his real phone, and made a call. "Isabel," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Cancel my 4 o'clock tomorrow, and have the corporate jet ready. We're flying the entire senior audit team from New York to Chicago. Wheels up at 6 a.m. sharp. Also get Robert Sterling on the line. Tell him to meet me at a certain Golden Spoon diner for a surprise inspection at 10 a.m. He's going to want to be there for this." The game was over. It was time for Arthur Harrington to come home. The next morning, the Golden Spoon diner was operating under a cloud of palpable tension. Rick Donaldson was a nervous wreck, snapping at his staff over the smallest infractions. Catherine moved through her duties in a daze, replaying the shocking events of the previous night. She was terrified for Art. She had seen the raw fear in Rick's eyes after that phone call, and worried what he might be capable of. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the cheerful jingle of the bell above the door announced a new arrival. It wasn't a customer looking for pancakes. 3 figures entered, and the entire diner fell silent. The man in the lead was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that probably cost more than the diner's monthly profit. He moved with an aura of quiet, absolute authority. His face was clean-shaven, his hair perfectly styled, but his eyes— Catherine's breath caught in her throat. They were Art's eyes. Flanking him were 2 other people. One was a man she recognized from corporate newsletters, Robert Sterling, the COO of Harrington Hospitality, his face a mask of confused concern. The other was a stern-looking woman with a briefcase. Behind them, a team of 4 other people in business attire filed in their expressions, grim and professional. Rick Donaldson, who had been berating the busboy, froze. His face went from red to a sickly, chalky white. He looked at the man in the lead, then back at the kitchen, as if expecting to see the old dishwasher. The pieces were not computing in his panicked brain. "Good morning, Mr. Donaldson," the man said, his voice calm and resonant. It was Art's voice, but stripped of its folksy disguise. This was the voice of command. "We haven't been formally introduced. I am Arthur Harrington." The name hung in the air, electric and heavy. Sal the cook dropped his spatula with a loud clang. Maria gasped, covering her mouth. Catherine felt her knees go weak. Arthur Harrington, the owner, the billionaire. Art was Arthur Harrington. "Mr. Harrington," Robert Sterling said, stepping forward with a masterful performance of shock. "What is this? Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Arthur held up a hand, silencing his COO without even looking at him. His eyes were locked on Rick. "I've been working in your kitchen for the past week, Mr. Donaldson, as a dishwasher. It has been illuminating." He took a slow walk around the dining room, his gaze taking in the worn-out booths, the sticky menus, the stressed faces of the employees. "I have learned," he continued, his voice dangerously soft, "that my company, a company built on the principle of treating its people with dignity, has some operational issues. For instance, we seem to have a manager who manipulates schedules to deny his employees health care benefits." He stopped in front of Catherine's station. Catherine stood frozen, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "A manager," Arthur went on, his eyes finding Catherine's, "who forces an employee with multiple broken bones in her hand to work full shifts under threat of termination." Catherine's eyes welled with tears. He knew. He had known all along. Arthur turned his piercing gaze back to Rick. "And it appears we have a manager who is stealing thousands of dollars worth of premium inventory and selling it for cash while simultaneously squeezing his staff and his budget to cover his tracks. That's a lie," Rick stammered, his voice cracking. "He's a disgruntled employee. I fired him last night for insubordination." "You fired me for discovering your scheme," Arthur corrected him coldly. "A scheme you discussed with your district manager, Mr. Peterson, on the phone, right in front of me. This woman," he said, gesturing to the stern woman with the briefcase, "is Ms. Albright, our head of corporate auditing. Her team is here to conduct a full forensic audit of this diner, your office, your computer, and every transaction you have made for the past 6 months. We will also be auditing Mr. Peterson's entire district." He took a step closer to Rick, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "You are fired, Mr. Donaldson, not for insubordination, but for theft, abuse of your staff, and gross negligence. Security will escort you off the premises. You can expect to hear from our legal department." Two large men who had been waiting outside entered the diner. They flanked Rick, who looked utterly defeated. His reign of petty tyranny was over. As Rick was being led away, a broken man, Arthur turned his attention to his COO. "Robert," he said, his tone shifting, becoming hard as steel. "A word." He led Sterling to an empty booth and sat down. The auditors were already quietly and efficiently beginning their work, requesting keys and logs from the stunned staff. "A shocking failure of oversight." "Arthur," Sterling began, shaking his head in feigned disbelief. "I can't believe Peterson let this happen on his watch. I'll have his termination letter on your desk by noon." "Don't bother," Arthur said calmly. He slid his phone across the table, an audio file queued up. "I was so impressed with your performance, I thought you might want to hear it again." He pressed play. A recording filled the booth. It was the phone call from the previous night. Rick's panicked voice, and then the clear, tinny, and utterly damning voice of the man on the other end. "I don't care how you do it, Rick. Shut the old man up. Make him disappear. Do you understand how much is at stake? If he talks, it doesn't just lead to me. It leads all the way to the top. Handle it, or I will." The voice on the recording was unmistakably Robert Sterling's. He had been using Peterson as a cutout, a middleman. The entire scheme, the skimming, the cost-cutting, the pressure, it all originated from the 87th floor. It wasn't just a few bad managers. The rot went all the way to the top. Robert Sterling's face, which had been a mask of concern, collapsed. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty grey pallor. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. "The numbers were too good, Robert," Arthur said, his voice a low, mournful growl. "Too perfect. No business is that efficient. I came down here to find a crack in the foundation. I never imagined I'd find out my most trusted executive was the one holding the sledgehammer." Sterling said nothing. There was nothing to say. He was caught. Arthur stood up. "The authorities are waiting outside, Robert, for you and for Mr. Peterson." As Sterling was escorted out, his glittering career over Arthur Harrington stood in the middle of the diner he now felt was truly his again. The auditors worked, the staff watched in stunned silence, and in the corner, a young waitress with a broken hand and the weight of the world on her shoulders simply stared at him, not knowing what to believe. With the drama of the arrests concluded, a strange quiet settled over the Golden Spoon. The audit team worked with professional detachment, but for the remaining staff, the world had been turned upside down. Their dishwasher was the owner. Their tyrannical manager and the distant, untouchable COO were in custody. It was too much to process. Arthur asked Sal, the grizzled cook, to close the diner for the day. Then he walked over to the booth where Catherine was sitting, staring into a cold cup of coffee. He sat down opposite her, not as the powerful billionaire, but with the quiet humility of Art, the man who had worked beside her. "Catherine," he began softly, "I owe you an apology for the deception. I never intended for you to be caught in the middle of all this." She finally looked at him, her eyes a mix of awe, confusion, and a sliver of fear. You're really him?" He nodded. "I am. And I am so profoundly sorry for what you have endured in one of my establishments. What Rick did, what my company's policies did, it's unforgivable." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why were you here? He told her everything. About his feeling of disconnection, his grandfather's legacy, and his need to see the truth. He told her how he had just planned to observe, but her strength and her quiet suffering had forced him to act. "I know about Leo," he said gently. "I know about his fight, and I know how you broke your hand. Catherine, what you have been doing. You're a warrior." Tears streamed silently down her face, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release. To be seen, to be truly seen after struggling alone for so long, was an overwhelming relief. "I want to help," Arthur said. "And I don't mean just giving you money. That's easy. I want to do something that matters." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "This morning, my lawyers filed the initial paperwork to establish a new charitable arm of the Harrington Hospitality Group. It's called the Leo Miller Foundation. Its sole purpose will be to fund research and provide financial assistance to families of children battling rare forms of cancer. We are seeding it with an initial endowment of $50 million. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The sheer scale of the number was incomprehensible. "Your brother," Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion, "will be the foundation's first beneficiary. He will get his clinical trial. He will get the best doctors, the best care, and every possible resource we can provide for as long as he needs it. You will not have to worry about a single bill ever again." She was sobbing openly now, a cathartic, soul-cleansing cry. The impossible weight she had carried for years was suddenly miraculously lifted. "But that's not all," Arthur said. He slid a folder across the table. "This is a job offer. We're promoting Sal to general manager of this location. He's a good man who knows this business inside and out, and I'm creating a new position for you, if you'll accept it. I want you to be the first ever patient and family advocate for the Leo Miller Foundation. You'll work with the families we support, guide them, help them navigate the system. Your schedule will be completely flexible, so you can be with Leo whenever he needs you. It comes with a full salary and the best health insurance my company can provide." He was offering her more than help. He was offering her a purpose that transcended her struggle, a way to turn her pain into a powerful force for good. Catherine could only nod, unable to speak through her tears. In the months that followed, the Golden Spoon Diner was transformed. Under Sal's management, morale soared. The staff got raises, better benefits, and a respectful work environment. It became a model for the changes Arthur began implementing across the entire chain. Catherine, meanwhile, thrived. With her financial burdens gone, she could focus entirely on Leo. The experimental treatment, fully funded, began to work miracles. Color returned to the little boy's cheeks. He started gaining weight. For the first time in years, his prognosis was hopeful. Catherine embraced her new role with a passion born from experience. She became a fierce, compassionate advocate for families who were walking the same terrifying path she had. Her broken hand healed, but she was left with a faint scar on her wrist, a permanent reminder not of her fall, but of how far she had come. One afternoon, Arthur visited Catherine and Leo at the hospital. He found them not in a sterile room, but in a sun-drenched playroom building a massive Lego castle. Leo, though still frail, was laughing a sound that was pure music. He looked up and saw Arthur. "Art!" he yelled, a huge smile on his face. Catherine had told him the whole story, framing Arthur as a superhero in disguise, which seemed entirely appropriate to the 8-year-old. Arthur smiled back, a genuine, soul-deep smile. He sat on the floor with them, adding a turret to their castle. In that moment, surrounded by plastic bricks and a child's laughter, he felt a sense of purpose he had never found in a boardroom. He had come to the diner searching for the soul of his company, and in the process he had found his own. The real treasure wasn't in his bank account. It was in the resilience of a waitress, the courage of a little boy, and the profound, life-altering power of a single act of seeing someone's pain and choosing to do something about it. This story isn't just about a billionaire and a waitress. It's a powerful reminder that behind every face there is a story of struggle and strength we may know nothing about. Arthur Harrington had all the money in the world, but he was poor in purpose until he witnessed Catherine's incredible courage. Her fight for her brother didn't just save Leo. It saved Arthur from his own gilded cage and reformed an entire company from the inside out. It shows us that true leadership isn't about profit margins and efficiency reports. It's about compassion, integrity, and lifting up the people who form the very foundation of your success. If this story of unexpected kindness and ultimate justice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that will inspire and amaze you. And let us know in the comments below, what would you have done in Arthur's position? We love hearing from you.